Yeah, while you guys are joining, first of all, thanks for coming and joining us on this webinar. And CyberFOX here, of course, and FifthWall Solutions. So it's gonna be a great one. Before I toss it over to them, just want to give you guys a little update on some things coming up in the community and where CyberFOX will be. First of all, if you're not following us on LinkedIn, go ahead and follow us because we're always doing something fun, exciting, and trying to also provide great educational opportunities like this one. So we are going to be at NerdioCon, which is in April, and we're going to be doing like an event before that week, since we're going to be all the way over in California. So if you're local, whether you're local or if you're attending for the event, I'm going to put a link in there for you to check it out. If you're able to join us, we have a really fun event that we're doing. We're going on the tramway. We're able to see some beautiful views of Palm Springs. So I'm really excited personally, but I'll include a link there for you in a moment if you're able to join us, if you're local or if you're going for the show. Love to see you. And then we'll also be, some of the team was in Vegas last week for an event. Like I said, we're always popping around somewhere. We will be back in Vegas in later April for another event called Connect Global by Kaseya. And the day before that, we're going to do another fun event on, again, we're kind of going up in the sky again. Someone from my team mentioned that earlier. We're doing a lot of cool events going up from the sky, but it's on the high roller. It's a really cool thing. It goes around and you can see some amazing views of Vegas. There's an open bar, there's you have the views, you have networking, everything, awesome people. So definitely I'll include that link as well. Love to have you join us, whether you're local, over there in Vegas, or if you're, going to the show. Would love to have you, come out and join us. So I'll put that link there as well. So those are just some two things coming up. Again, we would love to see one of them. Other than that, I will pass it all over to Wes and Will.
Great.
Cool. I'm quite certain that if I was on that high roller thing, I may actually pee my pants because that's what heights do to me. But it's like it's not true heights. It's am I in control of the height I'm currently at? I feel the same way when I'm zip lining. It's like the initial jump is terrifying, but then it catches you and you're good.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. If there's the ability to fall, that's where I get scared. Otherwise, I'm okay.
Yeah. Speaking of falling, imagine your business went through a cyber incident and you didn't have insurance. Oh my gosh, what a connection.
If only we had someone to talk about that today. Yeah.
Oh man.
Let me get us kicked off. So
Please.
thanks everyone for joining. I'm Wes with CyberFOX. Super glad to have y'all on with us today. The last webinar we did, we stumbled a little bit into cyber insurance, and I asked the group, I'm like, would you guys like us to do our next webinar on cyber insurance? And everyone was like, yes. So here we are, and really excited to talk about this. Will, you want to talk about, intro yourself, who you are, and what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, my name's Will Brooks. I actually see a couple of people in the chat who I know already, which is exciting. But my name is Will Brooks. I'm the channel chief at FifthWall. You all know at this point, I'm sure that the channel chief is a totally made up title that doesn't exist anywhere else in any other industry, but it's an opportunity for me to do stuff like this. So to educate and teach. And I'm sure, knowing that some of you already are partners of FifthWall, that you're going to know some of what we talk about, but a lot of what we're excited to really bring in is kind of in the latter half of the talk where we get to speculate a little bit on where insurance is going, especially in 2025. Because the fun thing about cyber insurance is it's not like any other insurance out there, and it's consistently changing, just like the industry, which means we get to talk about it in kind of new light on a regular basis. For those of you who don't know, really quick, FifthWall is a cyber insurance. I'm going to call us a marketplace because it makes more sense in the MSP world. So we are the largest and oldest cyber-specific insurance marketplace. So we're the only one. All we do is cyber insurance. We don't touch any other lines of business except tech E&O, which we're going to get into. But we work alongside MSPs both to consult their clients on what good insurance is, the security they need in order to attain it, what makes them an optimal risk, all that good stuff. And then we can also broker policies. We also got our start working with agents in the Pittsburgh area. So we have over 1,000 agency partners. And we launched our MSP program in 2021. Wes was our channel chief at the time. And one thing that he really taught us to do well, and I appreciate, is to speak MSP. That's something that we really pride ourselves on here, is not to speak insuranceese, which I'd be wearing a suit and tie if that were the case. So pretty excited to be here. But first, I have a question. You can just say yes or no in the chat. But I'm realizing now I'm asking this like a number, but how many businesses here carry some form of cyber insurance? So do you carry cyber insurance? Yes or no?
Lots of yeses, a few nos.
The sad face no um, gets me upset because you partially wonder, were you denied coverage? Did a carrier just say we don't want to write this? There's so many things out there. Wes, I mean, what has some of your conversations been with businesses around why they don't get cyber coverage, even if they want it?
Yeah, rarely is it, I looked at the cost and it was too expensive. I mean, sometimes that happens when people are just totally
Of
uneducated on
course.
what the market requires. But usually it's why I'm on this call. I've heard more about it and maybe I need to have it. It also could be I tried to pitch it to my senior management and they just didn't understand it. It could also be confusion around, oh, I think we already have it. We looked in our general liability and have this thing called a rider for like 100K. So I think we're good. It's usually a lot of those kinds of things, is usually what it comes down to. And anyone that doesn't mind to be brave, I'd love it if you'd let us know why you don't have it or why the company you represent doesn't have it. You don't have to, but I'd love some bravery there around like we want it, whatever. It's always helpful to know. And then, Gary makes a good point too, Will. Most of our customers do. If you're an
Yeah, just
MSP
looking
and
at
you're
that.
listening today, it's a double challenge for the MSP because you also have to learn how to talk to your clients about it. And we're going to talk about that today, right? Things like what can I say and not say? How do
Yep.
I address this with the clients that don't know what it is? How do I deal with the fallout if they yell at me and say, why do you think I need this? And I've never had to have it before. Or all of those things are hard to get all your clients to move forward with it as well. And Stuart reporting in, we have at our customers of 70% to 30 not. That's great. That's actually a solid number.
Yeah.
Every MSP wants to get it to where all your clients have it. Because at the end of the day, Will, we know as an MSP, you inherit your clients' risks and they inherit yours. And so
Yeah.
them having a cyber policy to cover themselves and you having tech E&O to cover yourself is really standard operating procedure in this day and age.
Yeah, it's really important. It also makes me think of um going back to what you're saying, what can I say? What can I not say? I saw someone in the comments a while back said that they're an agent, right? A lot of MSPs are like, I don't have my insurance license. I don't want to breach liability. I'm worried about that. Leave that to the licensed people. And I agree when it comes to recommending cyber insurance, when it comes to soliciting cyber insurance, that's all really important. But like a lot of businesses who like to protect their risks via contracts requiring insurance, MSPs really need to understand the component of cyber insurance, how cyber insurance is a component of their overall cyber strategy in protecting their clients. So they're not necessarily soliciting it. It's where you have to take some further components there. Um, but yeah, so that's helpful. I appreciate the responses. Wes, I don't know if you want to answer the Andrew's question in there, but um,
Yeah, no, go ahead. You can cover that one.
okay, so real quick before we move on here, one of the questions: do you have to be a NIST and ISO certified before a cyber insurance company onboards you, or will you be looking at higher premiums if the checklist isn't complete? No, so I wish, I wish not NIST necessarily, but I wish that carriers looked at something like even CIS and said, "Oh, this is actually a really good framework for baseline security," or even, depending on your IG1, IG2, IG3, being like, oh, if they're IG2, we know that they're at this level of security. Let's discount their premiums. Unfortunately, the way that carriers tend, and I think I do talk about this later, but the way that carriers tend to build out their risk profiles is on their own individual claims history. Let's say I'm carrier A and Wes is carrier B. We may actually have different requirements when it comes to insurance because our previous claims showed different results based on security postures. Now, the law of large numbers will say that eventually those things should line up when enough claims eventually come in, but we're still pretty early in the game. So you may have some carriers who say, yes, you absolutely must have MFA. You have other ones who say, if you're under a certain revenue, we don't really care that much, which is terrifying to me because MFA is typically free in a lot of places. But whatever, to each his own. That's kind of the mindset. Soraya, I feel like that should be standardized rather than carrier. You would think so. And that's just not how the insurance industry works in general, right? Like when you go out to get a quote for your car, your automobile insurance, right? You typically weigh that against multiple carriers because different carriers have different things that they reward when it comes to features in your car, your driving history, components like that, right? So it's kind of looking at it that way, that every carrier bases those things on their own experience. It's frustrating. Ideally, we want to see it standardized someday, but it isn't yet, and that's frustrating. So just little stats. Wes, I don't know if you want to go through some of these, but they're fun. Anything you want to highlight on these?
Well, maybe the high level is not going away, right? We've known
Yeah.
that. As we continue to mature our security controls, 8 years ago, if we'd asked anyone, do you have anything more than a firewall and an AV? Almost no one on this call would raise their hands. Today, how many of you have an EDR? Almost everyone would say yes. If we asked how many of you have it managed 24/7, either by your own in-house team or more likely a third party, many of you would say yes. We're getting to this level where we're doing more and more, and yet we still are seeing a raise in the sophistication and the prevalence of cyber attacks. That's not changed. It means we all have jobs, right? But we do have to accept that it is a cat and mouse game. There's no such thing as perfect security. There's no such thing as quote unquote unhackable. There's no such thing as I've done these things, now I'm guaranteed to be okay. This is about risk management. It's always been about risk management. And the thing about risk management means as we're assessing and understanding the risks that are posed against our business, we should be reacting accordingly. And that's where, of course, cyber insurance comes in. But we just have to recognize, looking at this data, it's not going anywhere. And it's going to continue to be a problem, which means we have to continue to talk to our business owners and leadership about what's going on in the world around us, because unfortunately it's not a one-stop shop. I bought my cyber this one thing and now I'm good forever. I wish it that way, but it's not.
Right. It's a really good point, and it's the increase in attacks that we're seeing on a regular basis. I mean, the second point here, the second quarter of 2024 saw a 30% increase in cyber attacks compared to Q2 of 2023, and Q2 of 2023 was the highest increase in the past 2 years that we saw. So you had a 30% increase over the highest increase of the past 2 years. So it's significant to understand. Like, yes, these cyber attacks are not going away. You're going to have clients who typically, either clients or maybe you're trying to get cyber insurance for your own business, and there are other people at the business who are like, we don't need it, we're too small to get hacked. But 47% of ransomed organizations are under 10 million in annual revenue. That's like almost 50% of the ransom organizations are small medium businesses, right? Or small businesses, I guess that's how you would define that one. And the ransom payments are high. Ransomware isn't the one thing I like to point out, and we're going to talk about a little more, but ransomware is kind of the big scary right now. Like, that's the one that most people are thinking of when there's an incident, but there are so many forms of cyber attacks out there, and a good cyber insurance policy is going to kind of cover the gamut of those. You're not just looking at, oh, I'm getting ransomware protection. I don't want you to go out there and say, I don't have cyber. I'm going to listen to that Will guy and go get a ransomware policy, because then you're probably going to succumb to some other cyber attack that's not going to be covered on that policy. So there's all these different layers that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to. But the data itself doesn't lie. This isn't going away. It's increasing. Yeah, Thomas, perfect example, right? BEC, wire fraud, invoice manipulation, e-theft, like all those things are gonna um, is gonna hit you, right? And or can hit you. So you want a policy that's gonna protect you from all those things. And industry targets, I mean, I'm sorry if this is too small to read. I'm just realizing now that those industries at the bottom. What I really want to point out, North America is where pretty much the majority of cyber attacks actually happen. 61% in 2024, which is a wild number. And then no industry, you can't really see it. I'm sorry. I'll send this out to everybody so they have it. But no industry, I mean, technology, telecom, financial, government, retail, manufacturing, healthcare, healthcare services, education, media, no one is immune to a cyber attack, right? They're not going to not come after you just because you think you're in some industry that's not typically targeted or not hacked. So it's really important to recognize this with your clients in the same way. If you're an MSP on the call and you have clients who kind of resist good security, it's the same mindset, right? Use this data. You help them understand that it's not that you're a target. One of the things I like to say is cyber criminals are just kind of casting nets half the time. They're fishing with nets, not with spears, although sometimes they do, right? Spear phishing attacks, but they're typically fishing with nets, especially for smaller businesses where they get Excel sheet information, they do a bunch of mail merges with fairly broken English, and they try to get someone. And if that happens, you're in a rough spot. Anything to add here, Wes?
Yeah, no, I think it's this the other big thing to say is yes, it's US heavily, which is probably the vast majority of the audience today, although it's not everyone. So I saw a number of you from UK and some other places, which is one of the reasons I like to ask the question. The other thing, though, when you combine this with the third bullet point you had on the last slide of the vast majority are against small business, 40%, 47% under 10 million. You combine both of those together and we eliminate the ability for us to say, oh, I'm too small to matter, right? A lot of times you hear people say, I'm just a small business. No one cares about me. No one's coming after me. No one cares about my data. No one cares. I'm too small. And that nothing could be further from the truth. I have this talk I give all the time, Will, where I ask this question of like, how much do you think the average Russian makes as a salary? And when you extrapolate it to US dollars, it's somewhere between $11,000 and $14,000 a year, US. That's not a lot of money. So don't tell me that a $500,000 ransom or even a $75,000 ransom is not life-changing money. It absolutely is. So we just have to recognize we think that we're not a target, but by the very fact that we think we're not a target and underinvesting in what we need to do from a cyber risk strategy makes us a target. So it's just important to remember that.
Yeah, I mean it's oftentimes we're looking for the cheapest, easiest route to protection because we think we're not a target, and that can definitely open us up to more issues. And that's, I mean, I love that. Um, yeah. So based on this data, where it's talking about small businesses getting hit, large businesses getting hit, the estimated cybercrime costs are going to be 10.5 trillion by the end of this year. That's no small number. That would help our national debt a little bit. Um, Here's my question. So a bunch of you said you do have policies. If you who have a policy, who here's confident that the coverage you carry or that your clients carry adequately fits the risk? Yes or no? Me, whatever.
So some yeses, some unlikelies, some I'm
Unlikely.
not sures.
Yeah.
Hey, I love the transparency, right?
Yeah, appreciate
And
that.
I'll even tell you, Will, you're a licensed agent. I'm not. So I oftentimes will be the first to say, you know what? It's not my position to say. We need to go talk to a qualified insurance professional, someone that knows this world and can actually look at the policy and know. I've gotten into that habit, Will. Y'all have taught me well to not say, oh, this is absolutely going to be enough, right? It's a delicate question. It has a lot to do with your industry. It has a lot to do with your cyber controls. It has a lot to do with your revenue. It has a lot to do with a number of things that all come into play. And so it's a tricky question, isn't it?
Yeah, and you brought up earlier the BOP add-on type of thing. So if you have a business owner's policy and your insurance agent said, "Hey, you can add cyber to this," and it's like $300, it's like, oh, that sounds great because in at a past agency I was trying to work with, they told me cyber was over $1,000 and I had to do all this security stuff. I can just add it. Great, it's enticing, and that's an issue too. So it's not just the question of do you have enough coverage; it's also the question of like, are you covered for everything? um, because what we're typically not thinking of is how wide reaching cyber attacks can be, and they can cover. So just because you got ransom doesn't mean the only thing you need is ransomware protection, right? And I mean, let's look at it this way, right? Coverage. We like to say your cyber insurance coverage should be comprehensive. You should have a comprehensive, standalone cyber insurance policy. So not a BOP add-on. If your cyber insurance policy is only one page, something's wrong. A typical good cyber insurance policy is between like 30 and 60 pages. There's a ton of definitions. There are those pesky exclusions. There's a ton of stuff in there, and it's not. I mean, it's not fun to read, but it is going to help you with a lot of things. And one of the reasons it's so important, and I'm going to come back to this little techie in a bit in a minute, but a good cyber insurance policy is going to cover all of this, right? And that's not going to say every single cyber incident you go through is going to call in all of these coverages. I mean, again, someone brought up a BEC before, right? There's no ransomware in a bacon egg and business email compromise, and that's really important. No ransomware happens, so your ransomware extortion coverage probably wouldn't kick in, but there are so many other coverages that are necessary in that time. I mean, a good example of this is kind of these first party or third party coverages up here, where you have things like forensics coming in and legal coming in. You're going to have regulations. There's credit monitoring. There's notification, which I didn't put on here, but there are a lot of states have notification laws, and you have to notify based on what state you're in and based on how many people had data lost. And my question to business owners is often, I understand that cyber insurance is expensive, but when you go through an incident, do you have someone on retainer to handle all the cyber legal lawsuits that potentially might come your way? Do you have someone on retainer to come in and do cyber forensics? Do you have a credit monitoring service on retainer? Do you have a notification service on retainer? Uh, that's that tends to be one of the biggest questions because most people don't. I don't. I don't know if you do, Wes. I have a lawyer, but to ask them to defend me in cyber legal cases, I don't know if they'd be willing to do it or if they'd want to. They might do it because they will, but
I,
it wouldn't.
I have
Right.
I have great lawyers who are very expensive. And one of the reasons they're so great and so expensive is they're going to say, we don't do cyber. We're going to go refer that out, you know?
Go to
So
someone else for
yeah,
that.
100%. And this brings up, so Tamara, forgive me for mispronouncing, made that comment earlier that ransomware is only a partial component of the threat landscape. Correct. That person is exactly correct. And this is why it's important to think about, and what we often don't think about is an incident itself can both start small, become huge. Not always just the ransomware business email compromise, can be a great many other things that can really bite you in the rear and you're not prepared for it. So that is why that comprehensive statement that you made, Will, is just so important. And we can get into examples of things that you may not have thought of that come under a cyber policy that can be quite expensive and damaging to your organization. And so that's where having that blanket coverage is really important.
Yeah, I mean, there are such like there are so many things that people don't really think about. So I don't know if this would probably fall under the banner of business email compromise, but invoice manipulation, which I don't think is, technically on here, but it is part of this is, hey, someone gets a hold of your invoice template, they create fake invoices, they create a fake email that looks almost exactly like yours, and then they start sending it out to your customers because they got a hold of your customer list, and your customers start paying you, quote unquote, right? Or business email compromise. Now they're actually sending fake invoices and fake payment requests from your actual email, which is even worse, right? So these are the kind of things that are going to hit hard, and there are coverages for those things, and we're going to get into some of those, but there's also going to be those additional coverages. Something that a lot of people don't think about is, let's use ransomware for an example. If your business goes down, average ransom is it still 14 to 16 days? I'm just going to say it is, but I don't know for sure because I don't have
Roughly.
the data. It's usually roughly 2 weeks, right? So if your business is down for 2 weeks, that's loss of income for 2 weeks. So a good cyber insurance policy is going to have income loss, right? Right down at the bottom. But it's also going to have reputational damage because maybe 6 months from now, you're losing clients because they're saying, oh, this person doesn't really invest in their security all that great. And they had a cyber incident and my data got compromised. I'm going to go to their competitor 2 blocks over. Right. And that's so now you've lost income not only during the 2 weeks you're recovering, but 6 months from now because you've lost clients. And a cyber policy is going to come in and say, hey, I can help with that too, at least for a certain period. Right. They're not just going to pay you indefinitely for the clients you lost. The idea is, hey, we're going to we're going to do PR. We're going to help restore your reputation and then get out there and get some new clients. Right. They're not going to fund your business for the entirety of your business. But there is contractual language of how long they'll support the loss of income due to reputational damage. So it's really important. Those things we don't think about because, and Wes, I fortunately have never gone through a cyber incident before. I don't know if you've had to navigate one or have been part of one where businesses have had to navigate it that you've been working with. But at least it's my understanding that when you're going through an incident, the only thing you're thinking of is, I got to get back up online. I got to get working again. We're not thinking 6 months from now. We're not thinking a year from now. We're thinking right now when all I see is that screen, that splash screen that says, hey, pay us $1 million or you're not getting your data back.
Yep. That's exactly it. I have been through several incidents, unfortunately. I've helped multiple organizations through incidents, and one that I'll share because I have permission to. You listen to Rob Chaffee and his story. So he was hit
Yeah.
in that 2021 ransomware huge outbreak that went after the Kaseya VSA, and he actually had every single. He's an MSP, so he had every single one of his clients hit with ransomware, and he tells the story of how they got back up. And you're exactly right. The only question that matters is how do we get back up and up to speed. Long story short, they did not pay the ransom because they're real heroes, and I'm so proud of them for that. But more than that, one of the unfortunate stories that he tells is no one talks about the aftermath. And for him, the aftermath was over 1 year. He still had clients that fired him after a year, that they were still committed under contract to stay with him. But their upstream provider said, we were harmed when you had an outbreak, ransomware outbreak, and therefore we want you to fire the one responsible, even though it wasn't really Robert and his company, but he suffered the firing. Those are nasty realities we have to understand and be prepared for. We live in an interconnected world. We all know that. But in the event of a breach and an incident, when we're hard out, all kinds of bad things happen. And when your clients and the clients of your clients are impacted, it's difficult to predict the long tail of what things may happen. And so that's why we just have to accept and understand that reality.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's a good segue to Techie and O, but I want to answer one question in here. So Eric asked, what insurance companies actually understand cyber policies? Policies from Smart Farm, I'm guessing State Farm, Farmers, Allstate aren't going to cut it. A lot of those are personal policies too. Like State Farm, I don't even know if they do business. I think they only do personal. So personal lines, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a personal line cyber policy to begin with. They do exist, but they're not they're few and far between. Um, one thing, I mean, we can talk offline, Eric, if you want to, but there are, because I'm not going to just call out carriers, but there are a lot of carriers who are cyber specific. So they literally, just like Fifth Wall established itself as a cyber insurance only wholesaler marketplace, there are a lot of carriers out there who said this cyber risk thing is so complicated. Coalition's a good example. You see Coalition a lot now. They even come to some of these MSP conferences. So they are a cyber specific. They have some other lines of business, but their real focus is on the cyberspace. Um, and there are, like, Travelers has a good cyber policy, Chubb has a good cyber policy, the Hartford has a good cyber policy. Those are ones that, like, if you go to your local agent, we're going to get to that, Thomas. But if you go to your local agent and they probably have access to maybe Travelers, Chubb, the Hartford, things like that. The thing you want to look into on those is a lot of times Chubb, Travelers, and the Hartford also have terrible cyber policies. They have really good forms and they have those limited coverage forms. And if you're going to go to your agent and get a policy from one of those three, because those are the direct access ones they probably have access to, make sure that they're giving you a comprehensive form and not just a bolt add-on to your business owner's policy that already exists. It's really important to understand that component. Um, Alex, unfortunately, I'm not licensed to write in the UK, but Lloyd's of London exists out there, and they write some good cyber policies. And I'm sure a lot of these carriers do exist in across the globe. They're not just US specific. But I don't have all the details on that because I do not write outside of the US, unfortunately. But I can probably connect you with someone who does. I'll look into that. So before we go to Tech E&O, because I do think it's really important. The other component I want to bring up is there is a type of loss called dependent network interruption, DNI, dependent business interruption, depends on the policy you're looking at. But this one kicks in when a third party vendor that your client utilizes causes them to be to be unable to conduct their business. So they're losing income now because a vendor who they rely on for their services to work goes down, right? And it depends on the policy. I'm not going to say every blanket policy has this, but depends on the language in the policy. Some carriers cover it even if it's not a cyber attack. Others don't, right? Just depends on the incident. But I mean, the big CrowdStrike incident that happened last year, that's a really good example of a lot of businesses that rely, I mean, depends on the case, but they're utilizing CrowdStrike services, and then an update glitch caused CrowdStrike to crash multiple computers and people couldn't log in, so they were losing income. Now, typically, business income expenses don't kick in for at least a week or something like that. So there is a time frame, and people were probably up and running before that. But there are incidents where your vendor going down could cause you to not conduct business. And if that extends past that waiting period, you'll get paid all the way back to when that waiting period started. So those are all really important coverages we're not thinking of. And Wes, I don't know about you, but I've been hearing a lot more about third party, like dependent business interruption happening over the past year. Like it's happened a lot. Schools, um, auto groups. That's just a lot of downtime due to a vendor that they're using. It's a really important coverage to have. I mean, we almost all rely on some type of cloud service to run our business today. Um, like for those of you who use HubSpot as your CRM, what would your salespeople do if HubSpot went down for 2 weeks due to some ransomware event? Right, you'd have to paper and pen everything. It'd be largely inconvenient. You'd probably lose money because of it. You don't even know what deals you had open. It's just things like that, right? So it's that kind of mindset where a cyber insurance policy is going to cover a lot of things. So tech E&O, tech errors and omissions. I want to keep moving here. Tech errors and omissions, that actually comes up to what you were sharing before, Wes, about Robert Chiaffi's story. Um, so if you're an MSP on this call, um, I know I asked earlier, hey, do you have good cyber insurance coverage? Really, what you should have is comprehensive cyber insurance and tech E&O coverage. Like it's a bundled policy that's going to have all those things. So you picture all the things you see on here, all these cyber coverages, plus this additional piece, which is effectively lawsuit protection, right? It's saying, hey, if you make an error as a tech provider, let's say one of your techs goes in because they're troubleshooting something and they turn off MFA and they forget to turn it back on and the client gets hacked. That's a major error, right? And that's the kind of thing where they're probably going to sue you. They're probably going to come after you, and they're going to want to seek damages. And it's the kind of thing where for you to you're going to have an insurance company, and your policy will come in and they'll say, all right, we're going to cover the legal costs for this. You may even have an airtight MSA, and I'm glad you do if it says, hey, we require you to carry cyber insurance, and I'm not held liable for these specific types of things, X, Y, and Z. We live in the age where everyone sues everyone for everything. So at the end of the day, it's like you could still be tied up in litigation, even if your airtight MSA is airtight, right? And any thoughts to add on to that, Wes?
Well, I think the thought I want to add on is a question I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people are going to ask and wonder this question. Will, which of these do I need, and who determines an event which one it falls under?
Which one of what? Cyber liability versus tech
Let's
E&O?
say my MSP or my business has a cyber incident.
Mhm.
Does cyber liability cover it? Does tech E&O cover it? Does
Yeah.
media liability cover it? Like, who makes the decision of which line would cover that particular incident? Is it the carrier that chooses that? Is that, give me some thoughts, because I know everyone asked that
I mean,
question.
sort of. I mean, one of the things to think about is if you're not an MSP or not a SaaS company or a tech risk specifically, then you're probably going to need cyber liability. You're not even going to need the tech E&O coverage. So don't go out and buy a tech E&O policy if you are, for example, a grocery store. Unless you're Instacart, then maybe you do need a tech E&O policy. So it's that kind of mindset. Then if you're an MSP, you're going to be carrying the tech E&O, and if you look here, that tech E&O coverage specifically is going to kick in those incidents where it affects your clients, right? That's the key component is you've done something that specifically affects your clients, whereas cyber liability coverage comes into play when something happens to your business. So in the case of Robert Chiaffi's story, right, both would have kicked in. I mean, in that case, he got knocked out due to this ransomware attack, and then all of his clients did as well. So the cyber liability would kick in to protect his business. The tech E&O would kick in to protect his business from the lawsuits that are inevitably going to come in from his client base, right? And the way to think about that is, again, going back to those different coverages that exist. Cyber liability has something like reputational harm on it, and that reputational harm would kick in because that cyber attack on his business caused issues for his clients, and his clients are now leaving because of the cyber attack that occurred, right? But the one key component I do want to bring up is if you are an MSP, your clients may suggest this, and it is not the case. You your cyber insurance policy, your tech E&O policy does not cover your clients. Your clients are not covered by your policy. That's really important to carry. And if they are, that means you have some weird, bulk policy that, like a master policy, where ultimately they aren't fully covered anyway. Like it's this minimal coverage thing. I wouldn't even mess with that. If someone tries to sell you a master policy that they say is going to cover all your clients too, I would probably run away personally. That just sounds fishy to me. And usually master policies have minimal coverage for your clients, which you don't want to. And also, I wouldn't want to be an MSP who says, hey, you should buy this, get on my master policy. It's a great coverage, because now you could be soliciting insurance and now you have a double lawsuit on your hand. So let's just run away from that. Thomas, I don't quite understand your point there, but Rob, that's a great question. And I don't necessarily have the data on that, because there are a ton of different types of cyber insurance policies out there and different claims out there. What I can say is we personally have never run into denied claims. And that's typically because we work alongside MSPs to make sure that their clients have the right security in place. What I always say, because the fear is always, hey, cyber insurance doesn't want to pay. They don't want to pay out. I mean, yes, on the one hand, no one wants to have to pay. But at the same time, when you fill out a cyber insurance application, just like any other insurance application, you are filling out a form that is creating a contract. And when you create that contract, right, that contract becomes legally binding. They also sign that contract, right? So you're signing your signature, you're agreeing to pay the premium. That is you agreeing to the terms of the contract. So all that stuff that you put on that form, if it's not true and a cyber incident happens because you misrepresented your business's security posture on that form. Wes has a great story that he's used in previous presentations about a company that got hit with a cyber attack because they had said they had insurance. They said they had MFA. The cyber attack happened. Forensics came in, determined, hey, you actually didn't have MFA, and that's the reason the cyber attack happened. And the insurance company denied the claim, and they had every right to, because they lied about their security posture.
I'm going to post a link to that so y'all can read it.
Yeah, please do.
There it is. And the thing to remember about all of this is, yes, there's a bit of a rumor that goes out that people say, why even have cyber insurance? Because they're going to find a way to deny it. And we've talked about this often. It kind of goes back to what you said, Will, is that at the end of the day, it happens far less than you think it would. And there's two main reasons why, from my understanding. One is that the carriers don't want a reputation of denying claims. It's not good for them. And two, oftentimes in litigation, the court will oftentimes side with the holder of the policy rather than the writer of the policy. And the reason being is that in areas of ambiguity or difficulty in understanding the language, the courts say, hey, look, you're the one that wrote the policy. You know it better than the client who signed it, right? They're not the professional. So we're going to side with them in areas of confusion. But the key to remember is in that link I sent you, there are examples where this is not held true when you either lie or you misrepresent what is actually the case. That's cut and dry. And so usually when you see a case where something is just thrown out, it's because in many cases, it's simply because it's a cut and dry issue in which something was improperly indicated. So it's just important to remember that.
Yeah, and even with MFA, right? A big question we get from a lot of people is like, it just asks if we have MFA, like where? And I mean, today we tend to say everywhere, and more and more carriers are becoming a little more specific on where they want to see it. Like they're saying, hey, do you have it on email? Do you have it on remote desk or RDP? They'll ask they'll ask the more specifics of where they want to see MFA enabled. But in the past, some carriers would just say, do you have MFA? Like it's this blanket thing. And if you said yes, and because you did in some places, but you didn't in other places, and then you had an incident, that's one of those more ambiguous cases. Whereas I think in the one that you shared there, West, like, I don't remember if it was Travelers, but it's very, like, I know they had a very specific MFA questions on their form. And even so, even if they had answered yes, maybe forensics went in and saw that they didn't have MFA anywhere. And then in that case, it's like, well, we can't even, how do you even fight this? So there's that component too. So yeah, I think it's just really important to that whole misrepresentation piece. One thing I've learned about the internet is when we see something like a denied claim, that's dramatic. Denied claims are dramatic, and we are also now going to let that influence our opinion of all carriers and think that no carriers want to pay cyber claims. When even in the case of this story, It's not that the carrier didn't want to pay the claims. The carrier was like, we're not going to pay this claim because you were literally a sitting duck setting yourself up for a cyber attack. But you led us to believe that you were protecting yourself on some level, right? I mean, our president Reed often says that cyber or insurance is organized gambling, right? So they're taking risks and they're willing to pay out the risks if the risk doesn't pay off. And that's the reality of a good comprehensive cyber policy. They are designed to pay claims. So I just want to leave on that. And before we move on, just a quick word about limits and sublimits. So when you look at your cyber form, you're going to see this thing called aggregate, right? Your aggregate limit is the total amount that's going to be paid for a policy. Typically, it's per claims or per event or per incident or whatever, right? It's the total amount they're going to pay for that cyber attack. Let's say that, right? But then as you look down the different coverages, you're going to see not everything is showing $1 million. Some things might show 250,000. Something might show 50,000. And typically the ones you always are going to see sublimited, they call it, right? So it's not that full amount. So let's say you had a ransomware attack and the only thing you had to do was deal with that 1 million ransom. And so the carrier just pays the ransom. This is hypothetical. They would never pay the ransom. They just try to negotiate it, but they'll pay part of it. But let's say you have that $1 million, they pay the million, but that was the only thing that happened and your ransomware sub was at the full aggregate limit. That's awesome. But sometimes, and this is another story you've shared before, Wes. I don't know if you have the link to that one, but you had a company that uh, had a cybercrime event that lost them $600,000. It was a $600,000 scheme. They paid $600K, but they looked at their cyber policy and they said, "Hey, that's okay. We have $1 million in coverage. That's great. So we can just file an insurance claim. We'll get that $600K back. All's good." What they didn't know is that their sublimit for that particular type of incident was only $100,000. So even though they lost $600K, they only got $100,000 back from the carrier. Carriers will almost always frequent cyber insurance or cyber crime coverages. Now, what's interesting is for almost so one thing we always kind of give guidance on is try to get $250,000 in those sublimits. That's usually the highest you were going to see. But what's interesting is recently carriers are actually starting to reward better security with higher crime coverage limits going as high as 500,000. So that's pretty significant. But again, they're going to want to see better security. They're going to want to see, and it's only going to be specific carriers. So you might get presented with a quote where you turn back to your agent and you say, "Hey, can you get me 500K on limits?" And they might not be able to because that carrier doesn't provide it. So it is carrier specific right now, but trends are moving in that way because cybercrime is one of the most common forms of loss in a cyber incident. But that's also why they sublimit it because it's so common. Gift card scams, things like that, right? Anything to add there, Wes?
This is why it's what I mentioned in chat. If you're listening to this today, make sure you're aware of your limits. Make sure that that's clearly communicated to your decision makers because this can bite you in the rear. I was trying to find that article and I can't, but basically the high level of what happened in that situation was they thought they were good because they had $1 million policy, but because it was the incident itself occurred through social media, the social media limits that were there was a very hard cap. I think it was 250K or no, I think it was 100K. And so the client just didn't understand. They're like, we have $1 million policy. The total cost of this thing was over 600K. We're good to go. And the carrier's like, no, you're not, and they sued the carrier. It was thrown out within a week. And the reason the jury or the judge, I suppose, threw it out was because it was cut and dry. It's clearly a front page limit. It wasn't even hidden in the terms. It was on the front page. You just didn't read it. It's not on the carrier. We're carrier agnostic. We don't sing any carrier praise around here. But in this case, I understand, it's important, your limits, and it's important that your decision makers know your limits. And if 100K is not enough on a sub limit or 250K, you need to have a conversation about that.
That's it.
So please don't miss this part of the webinar because I don't want anyone to get bit on that.
Yeah. And you might be thinking, well, what are the right limits to carry? I hate to say go ask your agent or that's a conversation to have with an insurance professional, but it is. I mean, there are a lot of factors that influence what you really should be carrying to protect yourself. It's things like Wes brought it up earlier, revenue, industry, loss history, current security posture. A lot of that stuff will influence really what you should be looking at in terms of limits. So it's just important to recognize that no two businesses are created equal, right? Like I apparently made balloons go up in the air. I don't know how I just did that, but no two businesses are created equal. Because there's even like a slight difference in revenue or a slight difference in security controls could totally impact your premium or your eligibility with certain carriers, all sorts of stuff. So, um, yeah. So moving on, Andrew, to answer your question, there's going to be a final slide with that information on here. I do have a question for everybody though. Um, this is not about your clients. This is about you. What are some of the biggest hurdles you've come up against in trying to get cyber insurance? I'm always curious about this one. Um, what are some of the things you've run into? And you don't have to write a narrative. It's just I'm curious what people have come up with. Thomas is a character, let me tell you.
The truth.
But honestly, that's true. Old infrastructure does not support MFA clarity. Lack of clarity, lack of knowing exactly what you need to have in order to be eligible for a policy. We see that all the time. One of my favorites, and it's not my favorite, it actually annoys me, but I call it the game of telephone. So one of the challenges right now, if you're an MSP here, one of the things I often will advise MSPs is go to your client, say, who's your agent? They might say, oh, so and so down the street. And your next question should be, how come I've never met them before? Right? Agents and MSPs are often afraid of each other because, and we're going to get to it, but some carriers are like pushing security controls and they don't like that, right? So there's this whole like, oh, I don't want to touch the agent. The agent's afraid of me because I might be pushing their clients away. I don't know. Like there's this almost this mindset that you shouldn't be friends when in reality you should be working together because the carrier is going to pass security control expectations over to the agent's going to pass those over to the client, and then they'll finally make their way to you as an MSP, and now you're playing a game of telephone and you go back and forth with these requirements, and then the policy lapse because we all took too long to get things done, right? It's just this idea of we want to all be kind of synergized across the cyber insurance application process because it involves the security component, it involves the limit conversation. All those things are a big piece of it. So it's not just one person who should be handling all of it. Any thoughts there, Wes?
It's important that if you're an MSP today, it's important that you understand, and this is a topic for another discussion, but you've got to learn how to embed this into your process. Whether it's a VCIO discussion, whatever it is, you've got to learn how to do this because I don't want to speak in such extremes that I'm hyperbolic, but
Yeah.
like you've got to get this embedded. You've got to get your clients moving forward, understanding it now, because when bleep hits the fan, that's when things change and you're going to wish you had done it before. If you're not an MSP listening today and you need to make sure that your business is taking this seriously, and we've got to learn how to speak the language of risk, and cyber insurance is a direct output of understanding there's just some risks that we can't fully mediate or mitigate, sorry. And that's why we put insurance as a stopgap. It's the same thing in all other areas where insurance exists. So I want to say that.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to skip some of this other stuff because it's MSP specific. So when you get this slide deck at the end, if you look at that and you're like, what's this all about? Let's have a conversation. I want to talk about what's coming. And this one's my favorite. AI isn't going away because AI hands are hilarious, but AI is not going anywhere, right? We all recognize that, but most businesses are not utilizing it to the fullest yet. So there's two sides to this conversation, right? There's the fact that AI usage could potentially lead to a media liability claim. We talked about that before, right? Media liability claims of libel, slander, copyright infringement, privacy violations. And this applies to web content, advertising, and digital marketing. So you went into ChatGPT and you said, hey, give me some key takeaways on this event I went to. And it says that this particular vendor did this thing and it isn't true. It isn't factual, right? That could come back to bite you in the butt, right? So this is the way that AI could potentially lead to an incident. On the flip side of that, all those broken English emails that the cyber criminals were using for a long time probably are going to look less broken. They're going to look more realistic. It's not going to be as choppy English. Right now, they are still pretty choppy, but with the ability to generate emails on the fly really quickly with AI, I mean, they can make one that looks way more like English. So there are AI tools out there to detect those things, right? You want to see that stuff, but at the same time, a lot of small businesses are probably not equipped for that. So it's just the recognition that AI is both a tool, but it is also potentially something that could increase our risk exposure. So
Two things I
yeah,
want to say about all
please.
this. One is I see 2 wrists and like 800 fingers, and this picture bothers me a lot.
It's a lot of thumbs too.
Clearly, it's a lot of thumbs. It's a creepy picture. Secondly, bad guys are using AI for sure, but they're still many times still stupid. I actually saw one the other day that they included the prompt itself. So it said at the very top, sure, I'll write you a better narrated answer on this invoice, whatever. And then they're too dumb to even take off the top of the
Yep.
narration or the top of the prompt. I'm like, oh my goodness. At least we're still in that stage. But yeah, we have to understand it is going to drive more sophistication from threat actors for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is. And on the flip side of that, carriers are starting to define AI. I was trying to pull up a definition and I wasn't able to do it before this show, but I'll send it over to CyberFox so they can get it out to you. But some carriers are starting to define it, and that's a good sign because that's going to start to provide clarity on how carriers are going to treat claims that come in due to AI incidents. Right now, we just have definitions. Will it be an exclusion thing? Will it be an endorsement thing? We're not 100% sure yet. But once carriers start to define something, that typically means they're thinking about it and they're looking at ways to, they're starting to analyze the ways in which an AI based attack could lead to loss, right? Again, they need past claims data. AI really hasn't been widely used long enough for them to have that claims data yet. Even if we have the data and we're like, this is obvious, I see it all the time, right? Again, carriers basing their stuff. We also are re entering what's called a hard market, and that's not fun. So for a while there, cyber insurance started to become more competitive. Carriers started to relax some of those underwriting standards. Premiums were actually coming down. We had some clients who actually saved money on the same carrier a year later. That's a big deal because there was that massive spike where premiums were 4xing back in like 2020, and coverages were broadening, right? But now, because we've seen rises in cyber attacks again, you're starting to see that stricter underwriting. Carriers are starting to look for better security. They're not even gonna they're not even going to consider you for a cyber insurance policy unless your security is top notch. And again, it's what they consider top notch. And that's where one of the benefits, I bring this up to everybody. You want to get as much access to the carrier pool as you can, especially in a hard market, because if you have optimized your security, if you have worked with your MSP, if you have worked to get your security up to snuff so that it aligns with not just what cyber insurance requires. Wes, sometimes you say you must be this tall to ride this ride, right? So you must be this tall to ride this ride, but they're not going to tell me I can't ride it because I'm taller than that, right? So if your security is optimized, you're going to have more carriers open to your disposal now. You're going to have more carriers who are looking at you and saying, this risk is awesome. I'm totally writing a policy for them. And I'm going to discount their premium because of it. We saved a hospital over $50,000 in annual premium just because they added a couple of additional security measures that they didn't have in place. So carriers are still rewarding that security, but you need to have access to the carrier pool in order to do it. So if you're going to your local agent looking for cyber, ask them to utilize their wholesale connections too, not just to rely on the 3 carriers they have direct access to for cyber, especially in a hard market. And that brings me to the last thing before we wrap up, because I want to make sure we have a couple minutes for questions. Carriers and continuous underwriting. Someone mentioned in here earlier that carriers are starting to sell their own security. Watch out. They're trying to steal your clients from you if you're an MSP. I don't want to say yes or no to that they're trying to steal the clients as much as, again, what they're doing is they are basing what they consider to be peak security on their own claims data. And then they're saying, oh, well, if every client who has MDR is more secure, why don't we just offer an MDR product? That's going to make them more secure. And therefore, I'm not going to lose as much money to cyber claims. Right. So I don't think they're thinking maliciously. They're not actively looking at MSPs and saying, we want to steal all your clients. Maybe some of them are. Maybe some of them are jerks. I don't know. But what they're actually doing is looking at the risk analysis and saying, if we provide these tools, there's probably going to be more opportunity or less times that we have to actually pay out. And that's kind of where their head's at. So that's why if you're an MSP on this call, you need to be establishing yourself as your client's cybersecurity advisor. Because I wouldn't be going to my insurance agent asking for cybersecurity advice in the same way I wouldn't be going to you saying, hey, what limits should I have on my policy? Right there, you kind of stay in your lanes. Obviously, a cyber insurance agent is going to be discussing some security because those things are necessary. But on the same side, you as an MSP need to be discussing some level of cyber insurance because, again, it's necessary. But that doesn't mean I'm coming to you for advice around what good coverage is. The same way I'm not going to go to my agent and say, hey, get me an MDR solution, right? Unless that agent's pointing them back to me as the MSP and saying, go to this guy, he can hook you up, right? That's kind of that's the relationship you want to build. Be seen as the advisor. Thoughts there, Wes?
Yep. No, let's move. I know we only got 3 minutes left, so
Yep, that's
I
it.
think you nailed it on that. I won't add anything.
Perfect. So again, some people asked how we can get connected. Wes put my email in there. I'll throw it in one more time. Or yeah. But also, I know we don't like if you're quispicious, you can also just type in fifthwallsolutions.com/discovery. We're happy to review policies absolutely free, not a problem. We'll let you know if the limits you have fit your risk. And obviously, if you need options, we can get you access to those options. But more importantly, are there any questions?
Well, one question I want to preempt is we at CyberFOX, we get asked this question all the time. Privilege management, are the carriers mandating it? Are they requiring it? Password management, all this stuff. Can you give us a little insight into what the carriers are saying around that? Because we
I'm
get asked
sorry.
that all the
I
time.
got so caught up on the time remaining that I didn't talk about it. So that was a whole part of this tighten up security component. For a while, it was backups, MFA, security awareness training. All that stuff's still really important and still really necessary. But as your risk increases, right, you're going from a $250,000 company now to you've made your first million, you've made your 5 mil, 10 mil, right? You now are adding more employees, and you're adding more employees that are probably doing things like downloading Spotify onto their computers and using the same password for everything. And carriers are going to see that as that employee pool grows, so does the risk that someone's going to install something on their machine that they shouldn't, or someone's going to repeat the same password so many times that it's going to lead to an incident, right? So things that CyberFOX has, privilege access management, password management, those things are all vital components now. And you actually have carriers who specifically ask about those things. And some, I don't think I've seen carriers. This goes back to that the optimizing your risk component. I don't know of any carriers who are directly denying coverage because people don't have a PAM solution, but dang, I'm seeing people reward it. They're saying, hey, if because of your revenue, because of your industry, if you have a PAM solution, actually, they won't even tell you that. And that's the frustrating part. If you mark that you have one, they'll reward it. But that's where you're going to want to make sure you're utilizing an agent who knows what to look for. It's like, hey, if you had this PAM solution, you could see a significant savings on your policy. Like, why would you not? I mean, if even if it's a wash, right? Even if adding that privileged access management solution cancels out the premium savings that you would make, now you're more secure on both ends. It's just a no-brainer to me. Like that's to me is the mindset there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I appreciate that. I know everyone's been asking. We will send you the slides. We will send you a recording. So we'll give you all of that. Joshua, I don't know that there is a reference for average saving because the carriers are not very transparent on their internal decisions. and when
One day,
they're
hopefully
doing
they'll
their
provide
underwriting
like
rating.
yeah, hopefully one day they'll provide you like the line by line discounts, like when you're driving and you get your car policy and it's like, oh, you have daytime running lights, $30 off. Like it's that kind of thing. We don't have that right now. But what we do know is there are times where we've added a privileged access management solution or we've had them add one and we're able to add that to our app and it opens up 5 or 6 more carriers that offer better pricing, right? Something that simple. So it's not
And
that
that
they, yeah, go for it.
that's where I think that's where we want to end is I know you haven't done a good job selling yourself, Will, because that's not your style. But
Yeah,
the
I'm not.
reason that I think you want to talk to Fifth Wall is they're going to go shop the market for you, right? And who cares about what carrier you have? What you're looking for is the right amount and the right policy that matches who you are. And so you should shop. You should be aware. And that's really what Fifth Wall is going to do for you is they're going to go out and they're going to look across the board and say, hey, given your industry, your stack, all this is why you need this particular policy. That's where Fifth Wall comes in valuable. So if you're listening to this, that's where the value of Fifth Wall comes in particularly.
Yeah, and to provide a little bit of clarity there, real quick, if you're a small business, we're happy to review your policy. If you're an MSP, we're happy to review your policy. We also work with a bunch of MSPs to help make sure their clients have the right coverage and that they understand that piece. So spreading the love, making sure everyone's aware of what coverages they have, and doing the best we can to protect them. So thank you to CyberFOX. Literally an hour on the dot.